it's recording. No. Okay. So the questions for the bell word today, we have, why is the U.S. called the arsenal of democracy? And then also, why do you think the U.S. wants to invade Italy? There's two questions here. Both of them are relatively simple. What do you guys think? Anybody have any ideas on that? How about we'll start with the arsenal of democracy? Does anybody know what an arsenal is? What's an arsenal?
Just like a build-up or a stash or something.
Yeah, a stash of something, like a stash of weapons or a stash of, like, I don't know, tanks or something like that. And then democracy, obviously we're thinking of like our political leanings, our governmental leanings, things like that. So the reason why we're called the arsenal of democracy is because we're supplying a lot of weapons, vehicles, money. We're fighting the fascism and all this kind of totalitarian dictatorship stuff that's happening in Europe. And then you also have, the Pacific and Japan happening as well. But more importantly, I mean, this is just something that was also coined by FDR. FDR is the president during a lot of this. He comes out and he's like, the U.S. is the arsenal of democracy. But it has other reasons for it as well. As far as invading Italy, why do we invade anybody in a war? What's the reason? What do you want to invade Italy for, do you think? Yeah.
To lessen Axis powers and gain favor.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to think, in World War II, it's kind of crazy the amount of ground that Hitler and Mussolini and other areas that were just covered across Europe, how much land they actually gained, how much territory they actually took. And some of it, was happening and we were, nobody was doing anything about it. They're like, oh crap, Hitler just took Poland, maybe we should do something. So there's a bunch of things that happen here. But yeah, invading Italy. They thought that taking care of Italy would shorten the war and help cut down the German army. Strategic positioning. It's kind of more common sense than anything. Of course, taking out one of Hitler's biggest allies would shorten the war, hopefully, and would help you out in the long run. As far as what we're talking about today, it's kind of some heavy stuff. We're talking about the Holocaust, things like anti-Semitism, Nuremberg laws, Kristallnacht, the final solution, concentration camps, places like Auschwitz, and then we have kind of the bow on the end with the Nuremberg trials and the United Nations. What was Hitler's goal? How did he try to reach this goal? This is an essential question that we're kind of going to look at today. What are the things that drive Hitler? What motivates him? But let's begin at the beginning of a lot of this stuff. Long history of Jewish hatred. This is something that even today, for whatever reason, Jewish people are often the victim of anti-Semitism, hatred, scapegoating, blaming, all these other different things. But it can find some roots in, way back when, right? Money is the root of all evil. Has anybody ever heard that? Money is the root of all evil. It comes from this idea, Timothy 6:10, to be, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Ancient Christians stopped being involved in the professions associated with money, tax collections, loan agents, bankers, right? All these different things. Christians are like renouncing that. I don't want to be involved with money because, it doesn't fit with my beliefs. It's, to be involved with money would put me closer to being involved in something that is potentially sinful or evil. So Christians are like hands off on that, but that doesn't, did the jobs of tax collectors and loan agents and bankers and lawyers, did all these different things go away? No, they didn't. Somebody had to do the job. And it fell to Jews to take up those positions in those professions. Professions are passed down from father to son. As you know, if anybody knows anything about tax collectors, loan agents, lawyers, if you're a doctor, if you're any of these different things, you're probably making some decent money. And if you're passing that profession down from father to son, you're going to have some maybe form of like generational wealth. Your father may have done well. You're probably going to do well. If you're going to pass it down to your son or your daughter at a certain point, they're probably going to do well as well. When the worldwide depression hits and inflation, which is the increase in prices, skyrockets, people start to blame the Jewish people because they were left holding the money. They were well off, right? It's kind of a, you did it to yourself almost if you're going based on this timeline of attitudes. I don't want to be involved in money. And then later on, inflation happens and you're like, oh, I really have no money. It must be the Jewish people's fault, is essentially the attitude that a lot of people are having. Because look at them. They have plenty of money. They're well off. They're not struggling like we are. So what did they do for that? What is going on is the kind of, anti-Semitic attitude that's happening. So people start to blame Jewish people because they have, historically a decent amount of wealth, especially looking at some of these jobs that they held. This is just a painting. It's an old painting done in the Middle Ages. The artist kind of makes comments on there that Jews were the worst of sinners. Not even in death will they find peace. Again, it's ironic to me because it's like, we're renouncing money. And then Jewish people are bad because they have all the money. Like, what's going on there? And then also, like, why don't we have any money? It's like, well, maybe you potentially did it to yourself. Have you ever thought about that? No, probably not. So we have these kind of old origins of the hate that you're going to see when it comes to Hitler and his kind of rise to power and his platform, things that he runs on. Obviously, today you're going to see some pretty awful images. I would imagine there's plenty of things here that might shock you a little bit if you haven't seen anything relating to the Holocaust. So I'm sure many of you have already. For some reason, I don't know why, I'm the same way. Terrible, awful things are always a point of fascination. So it wouldn't surprise me if you haven't looked up images or videos or watched documentaries about the Holocaust, because for some reason, and I'm not judging because I'm the exact same way, things that are awful are often interesting for us. So you may find this lecture today interesting. Do not have a guilty conscience about it. That is okay. It is still an awful thing, obviously. But, history's most terrible things are often, the most engaging. So Hitler preaches hate. Hitler blamed the Jews for the ills of Germany. He calls on the German people to get rid of the Jews, points out all the ways that Germans are superior. They'll get into this kind of attitude of like eugenics and the fact that like the German race is the best, right? Nobody else can top us. There's a lot that goes into like why World War II happened. There's many arguments that World War I was maybe a direct cause of World War II based on how crippled the German economy was after World War I. And again, the idea of scapegoating, right? Scapegoating is kind of just the idea of, placing blame on somebody else. Everything that's going bad here, it's a lot easier to say it's their fault as opposed to looking at, other problems and saying, okay, maybe we have to fix this, or maybe it's the German government's fault. Plenty of things like that. You can see there's a bunch of different propaganda that is going to look much like this. You will often see that Jewish people are, targeted for things like their appearance, though it does get difficult at a certain point for the Germans to find and identify Jewish people, but oftentimes they would look at physical features, things like your nose, other things like that. They would measure your face, measure your skull even, and that kind of falls into the line of this eugenics thinking, something that is common in a lot of racism and a lot of, even stuff that you would see. You saw a lot of this similar stuff if you went back to slavery in the United States and the kind of ways that white people would write off African Americans by doing simple things like measuring their skull, measuring their facial features. And the same thing that happened way back then is now happening here in the 1930s and 40s with Hitler kind of targeting the Jewish people. We see a lot of propaganda, interesting things, this kind of creepy sounding, every girl belongs to us. It's probably not meant to be that way, more so meant because there's this fascination with the youth, all right? And by all accounts, Hitler was, surprisingly very nice to children in Germany, probably because he knew that he could gain something from that. There was legions of specific young girl units, young women who were in Hitler Youth. The German student fights for the Führer and the people. The German student did all these different things that you're going to see. You have this person here is getting recognized at the Olympics. This is kind of like a shady Jewish person that's hiding behind all these things. Maybe he's in bed with the Americans and the British and the Soviets. It's not just the Soviets and British and the Americans that are the problem. It's also all the Jewish people is what these things are kind of trying to get across. And even more so importantly, like this is really, really important. Children, what do you know about the leader? You have all these, like a common theme that you have here is children. And it's super, it might seem super weird, but if you think about it, make yourself evil for a couple of minutes and understand why you might target children for a lot of your views. Nazi scholars and educators glorified Nordic and other Aryan races while labeling Jews as kind of inferior. They called them these bastard races. They're parasitic. There's basically nothing good for us out of them. And they taught a lot of this stuff to students, to young kids. The Nazi regime actually purged the public school system of teachers deemed to be Jews or politically unreliable. That way they can kind of implement a lot of their teachings. German educators introduced new textbooks that taught students to love Hitler. They taught students to be obedient to state authority. They taught students militarism, racism, and anti-Semitism. So, you can imagine if you were coming to school every single day and my class was like, I don't know, how to hate Russia 101, right? And every single day from like the age of like 6 all the way up until however old you guys are now, I'm telling you everything that you need to hate about Russia. Are you probably going to start hating Russia at some point? Yeah, probably. The thing about young children is that, often very impressionable, often very easy to spark loyalty in young children. It's a lot easier to make a young child loyal by teaching them from the age of 6 to like 18 than it is to find a 45-year-old guy on the street and try to change the entire worldview that he's already gone through. Does that make sense? It makes sense to me as to why he would probably target children specifically. And then even more than that, they see him as this powerful, almost like father-like figure, God-like figure in their education as well. At first, when you're first thinking about how Hitler is treating the Jewish people and when you're first thinking about how Hitler is kind of taking on this whole situation, it's economic, right? We're talking about how Jewish people have all the money, they're hoarding the wealth, our downfall of the economy is their fault. Again, the Germans are not doing very well economically during this time. Okay, they're pretty rough after World War I, and that's not entirely the cause for a lot of this stuff, but it's definitely a major focus. Jewish businesses were boycotted. People were fired from their jobs for being Jewish. Jews were barred from working in fields such as banking, law, and medicine. What does banking, law, and medicine, what do those things have in common? Money, right? You're going to probably make a decent chunk of change there. So this is kind of a way of maybe like, how can we set back Jewish people? This is, again, I use this phrase a lot for some reason. It's like dipping your toe in the water of, you're just doing a little dip. You're not doing the whole thing yet. You're testing the water. You're seeing like, can I get away with this? Well, did they? Yes, they did. And it escalated, of course. That's why it gets so scary when you see things, in modern times where you're like, wow, this is very reminiscent of like how, the Nazis started off. And you get worried because you're like, could that happen again? Yeah, I mean, anytime. Something like that could happen, right? So it's always important to kind of target these things and cut them out at the source. Nazis do amp up the persecution. We have these Nuremberg laws in 1935. They are named for the city that served as a spiritual center for Nazism. They denied German citizenship to Jews. That is hard to say. Forced to wear the Star of David. A lot of Jews are forced to kind of identify themselves. They can't marry Christians. Again, I think that gets a little bit at the eugenics kind of idea, keeping pure blood. Germans, not, dirtying your blood with the blood of somebody who is of Jewish descent. We also have these, so there's these two distinct laws that are passed. We have one that is they're happening in September 1935. There is the Reich citizenship law and then the law for the protection of German blood and honor. Again, thinking about the idea of, are you dirtying up your blood essentially by mixing or intermingling with a different race like the Jews? According to the Reich citizenship law and many ancillary decrees on its implementation, only people of German or kindred blood could be citizens of Germany. So taking away Jewish citizenship, right? The Nazis rejected traditional views of Jews as members of a religious or cultural community. They claimed instead that Jews were a race defined by birth and by blood. So it's not a religion, it is who you are, essentially. It's your cultural background, but also your race. and it's in your blood, essentially. The second law is protecting the German citizens, protecting German blood and German honor. It's banning marriage between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. It also criminalized sexual relationships between them. So these relationships were actually labeled as race defilement. Again, a lot of correlations between this and what you're seeing in like early American history with the mixing of black and white, right? You saw the same thing. Why are you dirtying up your bloodline? Why are you, you're a race traitor? All these different things, right? So a lot of kind of correlations that you might see there. More significantly than anything else, it restricts their employment as well. But more significantly than anything else, it kind of lays this foundation for future anti-Semitic measures. And it also legally distinguishes Germans and Jews. So it's kind of taking, instead before maybe you were German and Jewish, well, now you're either German or Jewish, essentially, okay? Violence erupts on this night of broken glass, Kristallnacht. It is a night where synagogues, Jewish-owned businesses, a bunch of different things are kind of destroyed. Nazis in Germany torched synagogues. They vandalized Jewish homes, schools, businesses, and they actually ended up, this is kind of a major turning point in where this direction is going, because they end up killing about close to 100 Jewish people. And on this night of broken glass, they staged attacks against Jews ordered by Hitler after this assassination of a German diplomat. So it's made to look kind of like the German people are mad at the Jewish people for this assassination, or maybe even blaming the Jewish people for this assassination, right? There's a spree of destruction. The Gestapo, which is like the secret police, pretty creepy, crazy guys that go around and they go around and they arrest 20,000 wealthy Jews. Bless you, 20,000 wealthy Jews that night, and they only release them later on the terms that they would, one, leave the country, and then two, leave behind their fortunes. So again, we're still on the economic side of things still, but you're obviously taking a turn. You see that it's less economic and it's moving more towards like they're inferior. They're not as good as the German people. They're bad people, essentially. All these different things that are coming together. Trying to escape. This is important stuff. Okay, this is important stuff. On November 15th, 1938, Franklin Roosevelt, he looked at the things that happened with Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, and he said, he basically did the thing that it seems like politicians do often. That's awful. I can't believe that happened. I denounce that, right? I denounce whatever that was. Denouncing is a big thing that politicians do nowadays, and even back then. He says, that's really bad. Anti-Semitism is bad. Don't do that, essentially. But despite his condemnation of Nazi violence, the U.S. actually still refused to ease a lot of the immigration restrictions that were in place. There was a bunch of different things that went into that. People were, partially afraid that maybe if they kept that immigration line open, that Nazi people or Nazi sympathizers would make their way into the U.S. But then there's also just the probable anti-Semitism that was, in the American government as well. So they're looking at this and they're like, that's really bad, but I guess that sucks. So, because it's not to the point yet where they're exterminating Jewish people. They're still looking at this and how bad could it get, right? Well, obviously it gets significantly worse. 350,000 Jews do escape Nazi Germany, though. There were many limits on Jewish immigration. That's around the world, too, not just with the U.S., but sometimes Jewish people would depart from Germany only to be sent back to Europe for forged visas. A lot of these Jewish people did end up kind of escaping to places like the U.S., obviously. We still did accept a large amount of Jewish immigrants. Argentina, you'll see a large amount of South American countries. They have a lot of German communities even today, stemming based off of a lot of this stuff right here. You can see here, there's a bunch of different countries and their acceptance rates or how many Jewish people they took in. Unsurprisingly, Japan at like several hundred. Surprisingly, in the context of modern times and what we're experiencing today, Palestine did take in about 33,000 Jewish people. You see Argentina, this is going to be kind of like a cultural hub at a certain point for German people in general. A lot of Jewish people did escape to Argentina and South America, Brazil as well. And then again, you do have the U.S. up there with about 60,000. But that's even with, certain restrictions on immigration. Next up, we have this life in the ghettos. It's not necessarily the ghetto that you think of today. This is kind of the origins of that word, even for the most part. During the Holocaust, the creation of ghettos was a key step in the Nazi process of separating, persecuting, and ultimately destroying Europe's Jews. I don't know if anybody knows anybody who is Jewish even nowadays, but I've always found that my Jewish friends they're very close knit, right? They're a culture group. They they tend to stick together. At least that's my experience with my Jewish friends. Is that all my friends on campus when I had them, it being from Chesterton, Indiana, I actually don't think that I had ever met a Jewish person until I went to Indiana University, and I was actually kind of blown away by how integrated their sense of community is. So to take something like that away, separating, persecuting, and destroying this group of people, maybe that's the first step, right? Especially if they're so close-knit and so tight together, separating them, kind of like cutting them off at the source and doing different things. That's the idea when it comes to these ghettos. A lot of them died from disease or starvation. Some were shot, some were deported to killing centers. Jews had to wear identifying badges or armbands. They also required many Jews to carry out forced labor for the German Reich. So this is kind of the very beginning of what is a concentration camp going to look like? Well, you have a good idea of what direction a lot of this stuff is going by taking a look at the very early ghettos that were set up. But it's worse than that. It's worse than it even says on this slide. The disease and starvation was pretty awful. A lot of these situations were unbearable. It was overcrowded, incredibly overcrowded. One apartment might have several families living in it. Plumbing broke down a lot. Human waste was thrown into the streets along with garbage, so that's not good, obviously, for your hygiene. Contagious diseases spread rapidly. In cramped, unsanitary housing, people are always hungry. Germans deliberately tried to starve residents by giving them very, very small rations. It gets even worse, obviously, when you get to concentration camps, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. During the long winters, heating fuel was scarce. Many people lacked adequate clothing. People were weak from hunger and exposure to the cold. They became easy victims of disease. Tens of thousands died in the ghettos from illness, starvation, and cold. And then you even get to the point where some individuals, they killed themselves to escape their hopeless lives. I mean, it's terrible, terrible stuff. Make no mistake, this is not a fun situation to be in at all. It is going to be very, very rough for anybody who's involved in this. And this is, again, men, women, children, it doesn't quite matter. All right, it's going to be kind of across the board. If you're Jewish, thought to be Jewish, and even other groups as well besides Jewish people were eventually kind of included in a lot of these things. This is just an example of I think this is supposed to be a barrier that was keeping the Jewish ghetto kind of you can't get out, essentially. After all of this, we move forward to this final solution. Again, just a warning, a lot of this stuff is pretty graphic, but I mean, that is history. History is often very graphic, and this is the truth. This is the true nature of life. With the implementation of the final solution, the Germans systematically destroyed the ghettos. So they go through, they're like, all right, we forced you into these areas. Now we're just going to destroy everything to break you up and maybe move you around a little bit more. In January 1942, the Wannsee Conference decides that the final solution for Jews will be the extermination of Jews and other undesirables. So this is kind of our first glance at some of these other groups that were also included in this stuff. And we'll talk about that as well. Nazis are adopting the final solution. This is genocide, right? I'm sure many people have heard of genocide. Genocide has not gone away. If anybody's seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, there's genocides that happen today, even genocides that happen in recent history, though this is the worst genocide that we have seen, at least in contemporary times. This is the willful annihilation of racial, political, or a cultural group. Oh my gosh, I can't talk today. You're basically targeting a certain group and finding a way to get rid of them entirely, wipe them off the face of the earth. This is, some images from the war, awful stuff. Oftentimes people were shot, gassed, burned, all these different things that happened. Different, there was things like gas vans that would roll through the streets. And we'll talk a little bit about that stuff too. This is day 5. I don't know, is this where your notes start? I have no idea. Either way. Day 5, the Holocaust, obviously this is what we're talking about. 6 million Jewish people are killed. And you could be killed for even something as little as one of your grandparents was Jewish. Maybe you're Christian, whatever. Was your grandpa Jewish? Well, you're going to the camp too, all right? 5 million other people they considered inferior. Romas, the disabled, right? If you have a disability, if you're gay, if you're homosexual. Prisoners of war, if you've been captured. Slavs, so that's a ton of people. Russians, Poles, Macedonians, Czechs, Serbs, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Bulgarians, Slovaks, Slovenes, Bosnians, Croats, like all these different people. Yes.
Can you just say the physical copy?
Oh, it's right up there at the front. I'm sorry. So all these different things, all these different groups. It's not just Jewish people, though. Jewish people are definitely the main focus. If you can round up these other inferior groups, as they called them, then you're only furthering the cause of kind of pushing the superior German race. Here's some images of people. You got children right here, likely in concentration camps, given the striped clothing that they're wearing. If anybody's seen the boy in striped pajamas, absolutely sad movie, but still a pretty good one. This is him right here. Check out what he's doing. What is he doing right here? What does it look like? Yeah, measuring his nose, right? As a way to maybe identify him as Jewish. Another way that they identified a lot of Jewish people during this time was they would go to the synagogues and they would find like the registry and they would find like all the names of everybody in there and they would go and kind of hunt you down. But there's other things too, like facial features. I don't know, maybe you're just somebody who has an abnormally large nose and you're not even Jewish, right? It doesn't matter. They're probably going to look at you and be like, oh, well, if we can figure out a way to make you Jewish in this scenario, then you're going to the concentration camp. You have to imagine 6 million Jews killed, 5 million other people considered inferior. There's definitely some people who maybe could have even been of German descent that are falling through the cracks too and getting involved in this as well. Some concentration camps were death camps. So some of these, either way, death camps or concentration camps, you don't want to be there, all right? It's not going to be good either way. These orange dots right here are indicating more like work camps, right? So they're concentration or forced labor camps. They would do a bunch of different things, sometimes for no reason. Sometimes it was to further the war effort. Sometimes it was just harsh physical labor to break them down. You have death camps, things that you might recognize like Auschwitz, right? And we'll talk a bit about Auschwitz. There in death camps, prisoners were killed in gas chambers or shot. But even it was worse than that too. It wasn't just you were killed or shot, and it wasn't just that your body was burned. It was if you died in a death camp, that may have been an escape from some of the things that you were actually experiencing there. That's how awful it was. So millions are murdered in death camps. So these are systematic places that are set up to literally just kill as many people as you can. Death camps, prisoners were systematically eliminated. Auschwitz in southern Poland, it's the most deadly of the death camps. And there's also a lot of horrible, horrible medical experiments that happened here. It was actually a complex. There was 3 camps. A lot of people think of Auschwitz and they're like, oh, it's Auschwitz. But it's actually like Auschwitz 1, Auschwitz 2, Auschwitz 3. And then like 45 different little satellite camps nearby. So it was a lot bigger than a lot of people realized. It was huge, humongous even. Prisoners were deprived of their clothing, given striped uniforms, hence the boy in striped pajamas and some of the images that we saw before. They were terribly fitting. They weren't like good fitting clothes. Usually they were like baggy, old, torn, not good for the weather, obviously. And they had all of their body hair shaved. Each of them was identified solely by the number he or she was designated. Yes. Yeah, go for it. You can see oftentimes like people will have like tattoos, like maybe like right here, or maybe they'll have a number on their arm or something like that. Elie Wiesel, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but he wrote the book, I think, Night. Very good book if you haven't read it. He has like a tattoo on his arm, and these are all things. It's ways to identify somebody. Even if you did escape, it's very easy to obviously pull somebody's arm up, see a tattoo, and be like, okay, obviously you escaped. You're not where you're meant to be. In some cases, the numbers were tattooed on their left arms. Prisoners were also distinguished by triangular pieces of cloth sewn onto their clothing. Sometimes they had like the Star of David sewed onto their clothing as well. Sometimes they were forced to just wear a Star of David. But again, getting at the idea that it's not just Jewish people. Political prisoners are wearing a red triangle. Jehovah's Witnesses, of all people, are wearing purple. Criminals, green. Jewish people, yellow. And homosexual people are wearing pink stars or triangle pieces on their clothing. Kind of a way to categorize and signify what group you belong to. They were counted and recounted. Sometimes this took forever. Sometimes it was in the middle of the night. Sometimes you had to wait for the SS officer to get there. Inmates were forced to stand motionless for hours in the cold, rain, and snow. And if you stumbled or fell over, you were dead. It's as simple as that. It's terrifying. You know, imagine having to stand there. If anybody's had to stand in one position for more than an hour, your feet start to hurt. Not to mention you're already weak. You're already cold. All these different things. It would not surprise me. I think in my position, I would probably fall over relatively quickly. I don't think I would make it that long. So it's a very big mental aspect that goes into a lot of this as well. And if you're wondering whether or not you would, well, your daily intake, your daily calorie intake would not usually exceed 700 calories, which is terrible. That's going to lead to a large amount of malnutrition. If anybody has ever done like MyFitnessPal, you're supposed to get like at least 2,000 calories a day. Most diets are based on that. And if you're going below that, then you're trying to lose weight, or you're going above that, you're usually trying to gain weight. So you can imagine if you're at 700 calories, you're going to be losing weight at a rapid pace. Sanitary conditions are poor bathrooms, diseased water. The camp was infested with things like lice, vermin. Inmates suffered and died during epidemics of typhus and other contagious diseases. Faced with a lot of these conditions, some people actually went through the process of throwing themselves on the electric fencing to end their lives. Imagine, life is so horrible for you at that point that you have two choices: to either continue with it or to throw yourself onto an electric fence to escape. So obviously, you can see that this is a very, very tough situation to be in. And, you know, if you didn't have either of those two fates, others became these kind of living skeletons who had lost all their will. I'm going to mispronounce this, but I think it's Musulman. Living skeletons who lost their will. Sometimes if you see videos of Auschwitz, or there's a lot of videos of, Jewish people when they're liberating some of these camps, and they just look like there's nobody there. You're just standing there. It's almost like a human body is not occupied by a soul, but just somebody who's just lost everything, right? Physically and mentally, they were spent. A lot of those people were eventually sent to the gas chambers if they didn't make it to liberation. Extermination camps for the elderly, sick, and children who could not work. Your biggest advantage and your biggest ability to stay alive during these times, if you were somebody involved in one of these camps, was your ability to work. Were you able-bodied? Were you able to carry on? Could you withstand some of these things? And for many people, it just felt like it was, me against the clock, right? Is somebody going to get here and rescue me within a certain amount of time? Or, how long is it going to take for this to beat me down until I'm, another person getting sent to the gas chamber? Jews were the main victims, though we did talk about some of the other groups that were there as well. Gas chambers used to kill 2,000 at a time. So again, they're trying to be efficient with a lot of this stuff. As awful as that sounds, up to 12,000 people in one day. Auschwitz housed 100,000 people in 300 prison barracks. 100,000 divided by 300, not a good ratio. Obviously, you can imagine the living conditions were awful. Total death camp totals estimated 3.139 million. A large amount of people dying in these death camps. And that's just those camps. I mean, you have the other 3 or 4 million Jews to account for, and other people who were murdered throughout this entire time as well. Some more images, just talking to you guys about some of these. This is Auschwitz going in. You have these railroads because oftentimes people were loaded up into train cars. So again, all about efficiency. obviously these people are not viewed as human beings even for the most part, so it's almost like loading, again, as awful as it sounds, it's like loading cattle up and sending them to a slaughterhouse, essentially. Some more stuff there. I believe these are the chimneys where you're burning some of the bodies. This is kind of messed up. I can't quite see. You have more stuff over here, just more images of the concentration camps. A lot of people, if you've ever been, has anybody ever been to Washington, D.C.? No? Well, if you ever go to the museum, the Holocaust Museum. If you ever do go to Washington, D.C., by the way, contact your representative. They will give you free tickets because they think that they can bribe you, even if you don't want to pay for them. They will literally give you free tickets. You don't even have to vote for your representative. Just say, hey, I'm going to D.C. I don't know. I did it once. It worked. So, and it'll save you like $100, and you get some. I think I got a tour of the Capitol too. It's probably not happening anytime soon, I would imagine. These are shoes. These are shoes. All right. So this is just one of those weird symbolic things. You would never think to look at a room full of shoes and become so sad and so distraught by them. But these are people's belongings. A lot of them, again, they're stripped of their dignity. They're stripped of their shoes when they come in. These are things that are just found in like the camps when they're liberated. This, you could imagine that each set of these shoes is a different life that was lost during it. Awful stuff. The shower rooms, sometimes used for showers, but mostly used for like gassing, right? You're probably not going to have a lot of nice actual showers, though I am sure that maybe there was a situation in the very beginning where they're acclimating the people that are there, oh, it's just another shower, so that one day they go and they take a shower and then all of a sudden they're being gassed. This is a place where a lot of people would be killed. I don't know exactly what this is trying to portray, but I'm pretty sure that this may be like scratching on the wall, people trying to make their way out. I'm guessing that is what is going on here. You have the ovens. Again, it almost makes you sick to look at this because you're looking at,
Oh, usually in the gas chambers, the residue and oils on your hands would leave on the walls and would make the paint come off.
That makes sense. Yeah, so that's probably what you're seeing here then.
And it's only exposed after the gas comes in. And it disintegrates the paint around where the oils are.
So yeah, again, just looking at this then is just, another, it gives you a good idea in some of the suffering that a lot of the people are going through. They know that they have no way out. What are you doing besides clawing at a piece of concrete? It's awful. And again, I don't know why this, of all the things, I think this is the one that makes me the most like sick to my stomach is just, seeing an oven in this context, it's just like, it's ridiculous. It's crazy. These things are built for, again, efficiency, how quickly you can put a human body in there because they're actually killing so many people in these death camps that they cannot continue to do these mass burials. It's easier and quicker for them to throw them in an oven and have cremation. These are literally running like 24/7. Like there's usually not a time where you're in the camp where there's not smoke billowing out of the ovens or the chimneys. As far as concentration camps go, they're first used in 1933 to jail political opponents. So again, this is the thing that you're seeing with a lot of this stuff. It's not a immediate jump to I'm Adolf Hitler, I'm in power, and now I'm going to kill every Jewish person, right? It's not that immediate. It's over a span of years. It's again, dipping your toe in the water. How much can I get away with? Is anybody going to stop me now? No, nobody's stopping me now. All right, well, I'm going to continue to do this. Is anybody going to stop me now when I'm setting up these Jewish ghettos? No, nobody's coming over. All right. Is anybody going to stop me when I'm putting my political opponents in concentration camps? No. All right. Well, I guess I can go a little bit further, right? So you see, individuals worked as slave laborers and were often worked to death. And death by malnutrition, disease, exhaustion. Again, these are look at how skinny some of these people are. This is what less than 700 calories will do to you a day. But it's not just the lack of food. It's also working, several hours out of the day and doing all these things and not getting food. And if, maybe you're the unfortunate person who's getting subjected to medical experiments and all these different things, and you have diseases. It's a wonder and amazing to me that anybody survived any of these camps. Some examples of the medical experiments, testing altitude survival to see how high a pilot could fly, or how high a pilot could parachute from a plane, and freezing tests to find treatments for hypothermia. And this is, again, done on live people, live subjects. Jews were also subjected to mustard gas to test possible antidotes. This is obviously a wartime tool that's being used throughout the war, mustard gas. So they're thinking of ways of how can we use these people to our advantage, essentially. Used with the idea of eugenics to try and prove that Germans were biologically superior by testing how different races withstood various contagious diseases, right? So again, a lot of this stuff that's going on here, it's not just, Germans are superior to Jewish people. It's also like Germans are like the superior race, the Aryan race, right? The white person, blonde hair, blue eyes. You're looking at other races too, and you're seeing like, how does this disease work against them compared to the German people? We know what we've gone through, but what does it look like when I give this person typhus? Or what does it look like when I give this person some sort of, terrible disease? And how does their body handle it as a different race? And the idea with that is they're hoping to look at that and go, well, they handled it much worse as this race, so obviously the Germans are better. There was also sterilization experiments undertaken mostly at Auschwitz. The goal to find a way to mass sterilize Jews and other hated groups. So you have to think again. Why are you wanting to sterilize Jewish people? What is the goal? What's the goal of the final solution? Does anybody remember? What's the purpose of all this? What are you doing? What is genocide? Yeah. Yeah, to wipe out an entire group of people. So yeah, you may have killed 6 million Jews here, but can you stop the spread of the Jewish race essentially without stopping them from having more children? Again, super messed up. Trust me, I know. But that's part of the reason. How can we stop them from having the ability to have more children? How can we stop the Jewish race from ever being on Earth anymore? Right? You want to wipe them off the entire face of the planet. Here's again some more images from some of these concentration camps. It's a little bit sideways, but I think it's some of the bunks. And again, so we have the liberation of Auschwitz. They're liberated by the Soviet Union in January 1945. Before the Soviets arrived, the SS, which is again that kind of the secret police almost, or the people. There's often people who are specifically assigned to some of these death camps and concentration camps. They killed most of the prisoners who worked the crematorium. Likely, I'm thinking probably to stop them from telling anybody about what's happening here. A lot of the time, sometimes people got to these camps and they had no idea that this was happening. So, soldiers, at least, getting to these camps and being like, holy hell, like I did not know that this was happening. And so a lot of people were very shocked to see some of the things that they found there. Even more than that, they blew up the camps. They killed other prisoners too, but they were probably mostly concerned with running away and getting away, trying to find some sort of, falling back to a different line. Some interesting books that Mrs. Miller has recommended to you guys, some things like Surviving the Angel of Death. It's apparently a good one for weak stomach. I haven't read that one. Auschwitz, A Doctor's Eyewitness Account, is going to give you some really, really horrific details of a lot of the terrible, terrible things that happened at Auschwitz. A Woman in Berlin, not about the Holocaust, but about the Soviet occupation of Berlin towards the end of the war. Pretty gruesome. So, you do see some other things that are happening. It's not, all of the terrible things didn't just happen in concentration camps, though that is certainly where most of them did happen. There's a lot of other awful things that happened during World War II as well. Specifically with like Japan too. If you ever look up anything with Japan during World War II, they're also doing some pretty horrific things, for sure. The United Nations is formed. It's an organization that would succeed where the League of Nations had failed. The League of Nations was obviously in place before. They didn't do a very good job at stopping this, so the UN comes around, and this is something that we see today as well. Creating the United Nations. We're getting close to the end here of our notes, so that's great for us. Creating the United Nations, the UN was created as a political organization to prevent another world war, created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So they're looking at a lot of these things, and they're saying, like, all right, we need to make sure that none of these things happen again in war in the future. Certain things that are maybe outlined by the United Nations is things like chemical weapons, stuff like that, things that you can even see nowadays. And then we have the Nuremberg trials. The International Military Tribunal tried German and Japanese leaders. for war crimes. 22 leaders of Nazi Germany were prosecuted. 25 Japanese leaders were charged with war crimes. And medical professionals, also those involved, a lot of the people in Auschwitz, were put on trial after the war for their participation in war crimes and crimes against humanity during the Holocaust. A lot of those doctors actually argued against and said, oh, like what I did was okay, right? And so that actually leads to a whole set of kind of medical guidelines of like whether or not something is actually okay. So there are changes that come after this and things that you see nowadays, even specific things like you need to have the consent of the person that you're operating on for it to be ethical, right? Stuff like that. And then icing on the cake, war criminals go on trial. The Nuremberg trials, Allies prosecuted the Nazis for war crimes. Thousands of Nazi officers, high-ranking party members and collaborators, including many notorious war criminals, escaped across the Atlantic, finding refuge in South America, some stuff that we talked about before. There's a large amount of Jewish people who escaped to South America as well. Surprisingly enough, a lot of the Nazis also escaped to South America, going to places like Argentina, Chile, Brazil. These are places where they can actually fit in pretty well because there's already a pretty decent German presence there. And a lot of these people are escaping because they don't want to be involved in this set of Nuremberg trials. There's actually, I'm pretty sure there's like several TV shows talking about like hunting down like Nazis in South America and stuff like that. And that is what we have for the day. Does anybody have any questions on everything? All good with it? Pretty straightforward stuff. Some stuff that you probably knew about before. The Unit 5 formative, the passcode is Auschwitz. I'll leave that up there. That is all you guys have left to do for the end of class. And that should be it. So we did the notes today. Formative assessment, you have the bell ringer, and that should be it. On Friday, we will do, we'll play a Kahoot, and then you guys will work on a Unit 9 review, and I think you have a test sometime early next week, but the review should help you out, okay? Everybody feel comfortable with that? All good? Okay. Everybody online, you guys doing okay? Oscar, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, good. Love to hear it. If you guys want to leave early, you're more than welcome. You're just going to have to do the assessment at the end, and then other than that, we're pretty much done for the day.